You're not happy, and you won't admit it. Not to others, maybe not even to yourself. You've got the right job, the right relationship, the right house, the right life on paper. You post the pictures, you say the right things. You perform happiness when people ask how you're doing. But underneath all that performance, underneath the surface level functioning, there's something off, something missing, something that makes Sunday nights feel heavy, makes Monday mornings feel impossible, makes every weekend feel too short because you're using it to recover from a life that's draining you. And here's what makes this so dangerous, so insidious. You've convinced yourself this is normal. You've convinced yourself that everyone feels this way, that this vague sense of dissatisfaction is just part of being an adult. That happiness is something for kids or naive people who don't understand how the world really works. But that's a lie. That's the story you tell yourself to avoid confronting the truth, which is that you're living an unhappy life and you've been living it for so long that you've forgotten what happy actually feels like. You've normalized the heaviness, the dread, the going through the motions. You've accepted it as just how things are. And the Stoics, they would tell you, this is the most dangerous position you can be in. Not active suffering, not crisis, but passive unhappiness. The slow erosion of vitality, of purpose, of joy, because active suffering forces you to change. Crisis creates urgency, but passive unhappiness, the kind that's tolerable enough to endure but miserable enough to poison everything, that's the kind you can live with for decades. That's the kind that steals your entire life while you're too busy functioning to notice. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." And living an unhappy life while pretending you're fine, while performing contentment, while convincing yourself this is just how it is, that's insanity. That's choosing to stay in a prison when the door isn't even locked. So let me show you the 7 signs, the 7 indicators that you're living an unhappy life. Not to shame you, not to make you feel worse, but to give you clarity. Because you can't change what you won't acknowledge. You can't fix what you won't see. And these 7 signs, if you recognize them, if you're honest enough to admit they apply to you, they're not a diagnosis of permanent unhappiness. They're a map. They're showing you exactly where the problem is so you can finally do something about it. The first sign of an unhappy life is you're constantly waiting for something to change before you can be happy. You tell yourself you'll be happy when you get the promotion, when you lose the weight, when you meet the right person, when you make more money, when the kids are older, when you retire, when. And that waiting, that perpetual postponement of happiness until some future condition is met, it's not hope, it's a trap. Because the condition changes, but the waiting doesn't. You get the promotion and suddenly you'll be happy when you get the next one. You lose the weight and suddenly you'll be happy when you maintain it. You meet the person and suddenly you'll be happy when the relationship deepens. The goalpost keeps moving because the problem was never the external condition. The problem is that you've made happiness conditional. And conditional happiness is just suffering with a timeline. Here's what this looks like in practice. You wake up and your first thought isn't about today, it's about Friday. You're not present for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because you're mentally already in the weekend. And then the weekend comes and you spend it recovering from the week, dreading the return to Monday, and never actually being present for the weekend either. So you're never actually here, never actually in your life. You're always in some imagined future where things will be different, where you'll finally be happy, where life will finally start. But that future never arrives because when you get there, you're already projecting to the next thing. Epictetus taught that happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control and some things are not. And the future, that imagined version of life where you'll finally be happy, that's not within your control. You can't control whether you get the promotion. You can't control whether the relationship works out. You can't control whether the external conditions align the way you hope. All you can control is now, this moment, this choice, this action. And if you're spending all your energy focused on a future you can't control, you're guaranteeing that you'll never be happy because you're never actually living. You're just waiting to live. I know someone who spent 20 years waiting, waited through their 20s to finish school, waited through their 30s to advance their career, waited through their 40s for their kids to grow up. And at 50, they looked around and realized they'd spent their entire life waiting for some future moment when they'd finally be happy. And that moment never came. Because happiness isn't a destination you arrive at when conditions are perfect. Happiness is a practice. It's the ability to find meaning, to find presence, to find gratitude in what is, not in what might be. Seneca saw this pattern destroy people. He wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence on the future." And anxious dependence on the future is exactly what you're living. You're anxiously waiting for some external condition to change so you can finally give yourself permission to be happy. But here's what you need to understand. If you can't be happy now with what you have, you won't be happy then with more. Because the problem isn't the circumstances. The problem is that you've externalized your happiness, made it dependent on things you can't control, and no amount of external success will fix an internal problem. So here's how you know if this sign applies to you. Finish this sentence honestly. I'll be happy when... If you have an answer, if there's a condition, if there's something external that needs to happen before you can be happy, then you're living an unhappy life. And the solution isn't to achieve the thing, it's to stop making your happiness conditional. It's to find what you can be grateful for now, what brings meaning now, what's worth appreciating now. Not because you're settling, not because you're giving up on growth, but because happiness is a practice you do in the present, not a reward you get in the future. The second sign of an unhappy life is you're exhausted, but you can't point to anything you actually built. You're busy, you're working hard, you're putting in hours, but at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you can't point to anything meaningful that you created, accomplished, or moved forward. You're just tired, drained from activity that produced nothing that matters to you. And that exhaustion without output, that effort without result, it's one of the clearest signs that you're living a life that's not aligned with what you actually value. Because real work, work that matters, work that's aligned with your purpose, it's tiring, but it's also fulfilling. It drains you, but it also fills you. But what you're doing, it just drains. It just takes. And you're left empty. Here's what this looks like. Your calendar is full. You're in meetings. You're answering emails. You're managing tasks. You're putting out fires. And you fall into bed at night completely spent. But when someone asks what you accomplished, when you try to articulate what you built, what you moved forward, what you created, there's nothing, or there's nothing that matters to you. You accomplished things for other people, advanced someone else's vision, built someone else's dream. But your dream, your purpose, your meaningful work that didn't get any attention, that got the leftovers. That got whatever energy was left after you gave everything to things that don't actually matter to you. Marcus Aurelius understood this completely. As emperor, he could have spent every moment responding to demands, managing the endless requests, the constant needs of an empire. But he didn't. He protected time for what mattered to him, for philosophy, for reflection, for the internal work that made him capable of leading well. And he wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And if you're exhausted from activity that doesn't build anything meaningful, you're not living. You're just functioning. You're just maintaining. You're just getting through. I've watched people spend entire careers like this. Decades of hard work, of long hours, of real effort. And at the end, they look back and realize they built nothing that was theirs. They advanced someone else's company, someone else's vision, someone else's legacy. And there's nothing wrong with working for someone else, nothing wrong with being part of a larger mission. But if that mission doesn't align with your values, if that work doesn't feel meaningful to you, if you're just trading time for money with no sense of purpose beyond survival, then you're going to be exhausted and unhappy, no matter how successful you are on paper. Seneca taught that we are not given a short life, but we make it short. We are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. And spending your energy on things that don't matter to you, that don't build toward anything meaningful, that's waste. That's throwing away your one finite life on activities that leave you empty. So here's the diagnostic. At the end of your week, what can you point to that you actually built? What moved forward that matters to you? What did you create that's aligned with your values, your purpose, your vision for your life? And if the answer is nothing, if all your effort went to maintaining, to responding to activities that serve someone else's agenda, but not your own, then you're living an unhappy life. And the solution isn't to quit your job or abandon your responsibilities. The solution is to protect time, even small amounts of time, for work that's actually yours, for building something that matters to you. Because that building, that creation, that's what creates fulfillment, and without it, you're just exhausted. The third sign of an unhappy life is you need substances or distractions to get through normal days. You need coffee to wake up, alcohol to wind down, Netflix to numb out, social media to distract yourself, shopping to feel something, food to cope. And you've normalized this. You've convinced yourself everyone does it, that this is just how modern life works. But it's not. What you're doing is medicating. You're using substances and distractions to tolerate a life you don't actually want to be living. And that dependence, that need for something external to make your internal experience tolerable, that's a clear sign that something fundamental is wrong. Here's what this looks like. You wake up and you can't function until you have coffee, not because you enjoy coffee, but because you need it to push through the exhaustion from a life that's draining you. You get through the workday, and the moment you're home, you pour a drink. Not to celebrate, not to savor, but to take the edge off, to numb the stress, to make the evening bearable. You sit down and immediately reach for your phone, for the TV, for anything that will distract you from being alone with your thoughts. Because being alone with your thoughts means confronting how you actually feel about your life. And you don't want to do that, so you stay distracted, stay medicated, stay numb. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And you're not free, you're dependent. Dependent on substances to regulate your energy. Dependent on distractions to regulate your emotions. You're dependent on external inputs to make your internal experience tolerable. And that dependency, that need, it's a prison. It's proof that you can't handle your own life. Without help, without numbing, without escape. And I'm not talking about addiction, I'm talking about the normalized version, the socially acceptable version, the everyone does it version. Because just because everyone does it doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means everyone's unhappy and coping the same way. I know someone who couldn't get through a single evening without drinking. Not alcoholism in the clinical sense, just 2 or 3 drinks every night to take the edge off. And they convinced themselves it was fine, it was normal, it was just how they relaxed. But when they actually stopped for a month, when they sat with their evenings sober, they realized something. They hated their life. They hated their job, their routine, their lack of purpose, and the drinking wasn't relaxing them. It was allowing them to tolerate a life they knew was wrong. Once they saw that, once they recognized the pattern, they couldn't unsee it, and they had to make a choice. Keep medicating and tolerating, or stop medicating and change what needed to change. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And when you're dependent on substances and distractions, you're giving your power to outside things. You're saying, I can't handle my own mind, my own emotions, my own experience without help. And that's weakness. That's fragility. That's the opposite of the strength that comes from facing your life directly without numbing, without escape. So here's the test. Can you go a week without the things you use to cope? Without the evening drinks, without the endless scrolling, without the shopping, without the binge watching? Not because those things are inherently bad, but because if you can't go without them, if you need them to get through normal days, then they're not enhancing your life. They're masking a problem. And you need to see the problem clearly before you can fix it. Because the problem isn't that you need to relax. The problem is that you need to escape. And escape is not the same as rest. Escape is avoiding. Rest is recovering so you can engage more fully. And if you're constantly escaping, constantly needing something to make your life tolerable, then you're not living a life worth living. You're just surviving a life you need to change. The fourth sign of an unhappy life is you resent the people closest to you. Not because they're bad people, not because they've done something terrible, but because they represent the life you chose and now regret. Your partner becomes the symbol of the path you're stuck on. Your kids become the reason you can't pursue what you actually want. Your parents become the source of expectations you're still trying to meet. And that resentment, that low-level constant irritation with the people you're supposed to love, it's not about them, it's about you. It's about the fact that you made choices you wish you hadn't made, and instead of taking responsibility for those choices and either changing them or accepting them, you're blaming the people who are part of them. Here's what this looks like. Your partner asks you something simple and you snap. They didn't do anything wrong, they're just existing, but their presence reminds you of all the things you're not doing, all the freedom you don't have, all the dreams you put on hold. Your kids need attention, and instead of giving it willingly, you give it resentfully, thinking about all the things you could be doing if they weren't there, if you didn't have this responsibility. Your parents call and you feel obligation instead of warmth, duty instead of desire, because seeing them means confronting who they wanted you to be versus who you actually are. And all of that resentment, all of that blame, it's just displaced dissatisfaction with your own choices. Seneca warned about this pattern. He wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which depends on tomorrow and wastes today. And you're wasting today resenting the people in it because they're not part of the tomorrow you're fantasizing about. But here's what you're missing. Those people, those relationships, they're not the obstacle to your happiness. Your unhappiness is. And blaming them, resenting them, making them the reason you can't have what you want, that's just avoiding responsibility for your own dissatisfaction. I've watched marriages collapse under this weight, not because of infidelity or abuse, but because one person spent years resenting the other for representing the life they felt trapped in. They'd think if I hadn't met them, if I hadn't gotten married, if I hadn't had kids, I could have done X, Y, Z. And that thinking, that fantasy, it poisoned everything, because the truth is, you made choices. You chose this person, chose this life, chose these responsibilities, and you can either own those choices, find meaning in them, make them work, or you can change them. But what you can't do without destroying yourself and everyone around you is stay and resent, stay and blame, stay and make everyone pay for your own regret. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this extensively. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." But he didn't write that to justify resentment. He wrote it to prepare himself to not be controlled by others, to not let their behavior determine his response. And the same principle applies here. The people in your life, they're going to have needs, they're going to have expectations, they're going to require things from you. That's not the problem. The problem is when you resent them for it, instead of either meeting those needs willingly or setting boundaries clearly. So here's the diagnostic. When you think about the people closest to you, what's your dominant emotion? Is it warmth, appreciation, love, or is it obligation, resentment, irritation? And if it's the latter, if you're consistently feeling resentful toward people you're supposed to care about, then you're living an unhappy life. And the solution isn't to leave them, to blow up your relationships, to run away. The solution is to take responsibility, to either accept the life you've chosen and find meaning in it, or to change what needs to change. But the one thing you can't do is stay and resent, because that resentment will poison everything. It will destroy your relationships, destroy your peace, and destroy any chance you have of actually being happy. The fifth sign of an unhappy life is you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely excited about something. Not surface-level excited, not momentarily distracted, but deeply engaged, genuinely looking forward to something, feeling alive with anticipation. Everything's just become routine, obligation, going through the motions. You're not depressed in the clinical sense, you're just flat. Just going through the days without any real spark, without any genuine enthusiasm, without any sense that there's something ahead worth looking forward to. And that flatness, that absence of excitement, it's not maturity, it's not wisdom, it's not just how life is when you're an adult. It's a sign that you've stopped growing, stopped challenging yourself, stopped engaging with things that make you feel alive. Here's what this looks like. Someone asks what you're excited about and you can't answer. You search your mind and there's nothing. No trip you're planning, no project you're building, no skill you're learning, no goal you're working toward that actually lights you up. Just obligations, just maintenance, just getting through. You wake up and there's nothing to look forward to except maybe the weekend. And even that's not really excitement, it's just relief from the weekday grind. And this absence of excitement, this flatness, it's slowly killing something essential in you. It's turning you into someone who's just waiting out the clock, just passing time until retirement or death or some other endpoint where you'll finally be allowed to stop. Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And you've stopped reacting with any real energy, any real engagement. You've become passive, resigned, just accepting whatever comes without any real investment in shaping it, improving it, making it more alive. And that passivity, that resignation, it's not peace. Peace is active. Peace is choosing calm while still being fully engaged with life. But what you have isn't peace, it's just shutdown. It's emotional self-protection from a life that's stopped offering you anything worth getting excited about. I know someone who realized they hadn't felt genuinely excited in over 5 years. Not about work, not about relationships, not about hobbies, not about anything. They were functional, they were fine. They showed up to everything they were supposed to show up to, but there was no spark, no enthusiasm, no sense of being truly alive. And when they recognized this, when they actually sat with how long it had been since they felt that alive feeling, it broke something open. Because they realized they'd been sleepwalking through life, just maintaining, just surviving, just getting through. And that's not living, that's just not dying. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And if you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely excited, if there's nothing ahead that makes you feel alive with anticipation, then you haven't begun to live. You're just existing, just maintaining, just running out the clock on a life that could have been so much more if you'd been willing to engage with it, to challenge yourself, to pursue things that matter enough to create that spark. So here's the question. What's the last thing that genuinely excited you? Not distracted you, not entertained you, not helped you pass time, but actually made you feel engaged, alive, looking forward. And if you can't answer, if it's been months or years, then you need to ask why. What happened? When did you stop pursuing things that make you feel alive? When did you trade excitement for safety, engagement for routine, growth for maintenance? And whatever the answer is, the solution is the same. You need to find something worth getting excited about, something that challenges you, grows you, makes you feel like you're building towards something instead of just passing time. Because without that, without something ahead that makes you feel alive, you're not living, you're just waiting. And waiting is the slowest form of dying. The sixth sign of an unhappy life is you're constantly comparing your inside to everyone else's outside. You look at other people's lives and they seem easier, happier, more successful, more together, and you feel inadequate, feel behind, feel like you're the only one struggling while everyone else has it figured out. And that comparison, that constant measuring of your messy internal experience against everyone else's curated external presentation, it's destroying you because you're comparing reality to performance, truth to highlight reel, and you're always going to come up short because you're the only one who sees your full story while everyone else only shows you their best parts. Here's what this looks like. You scroll social media and everyone's on vacation, everyone's celebrating something, everyone's relationship looks perfect, everyone's career is advancing, everyone's kids are thriving, and you look at your life and it feels smaller, harder, messier. You're struggling with things that don't seem to touch anyone else. You're facing challenges that everyone else seems to have solved, and you start to believe that you're uniquely failing, that everyone else has access to some formula for happiness that you somehow missed. But what you're actually seeing isn't reality. It's performance. It's the edited version. It's what people want you to see, not what they're actually living. Seneca understood this trap completely. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And when you're constantly comparing yourself to others, you're always going to crave more because comparison creates artificial scarcity. It makes you focus on what you don't have instead of what you do. It makes you measure your worth by external metrics instead of internal alignment. And that focus, that outward comparison, it guarantees unhappiness because there will always be someone with more, someone doing better, someone who appears to have what you want. I've watched people torture themselves with comparison. They'd achieve something significant, and instead of celebrating it, they'd immediately look at someone who achieved more. They'd build something meaningful, and instead of being proud, they'd notice someone who built something bigger, and nothing was ever enough because they weren't measuring against their own progress, their own growth, their own values. They were measuring against an impossible standard of being better than everyone at everything. And that's not ambition. That's self-destruction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself to make it just and holy." And when you're constantly comparing, when you're constantly looking at what others have or do or appear to be, you're wasting enormous energy that could be going into your own growth, your own progress, your own alignment. Because the truth is, you have no idea what's actually happening in anyone else's life. You don't know their struggles, their sacrifices, their internal experience. You only know what they show you, and what they show you is designed to look good, not to be true. So here's the diagnostic. How much of your day is spent thinking about what other people have, what other people are doing, what other people appear to be, and how much is spent on your own path, your own progress, your own alignment with what actually matters to you? Because if you're spending more time looking sideways than looking forward, if you're more aware of what others have than what you're building, then you're living an unhappy life. And the solution is simple, but not easy. Stop looking sideways. Stop comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. Stop measuring your messy reality against someone else's polished performance and start focusing on your own path, your own progress, your own growth. Because comparison steals joy, steals presence, steals the ability to appreciate what you've built. And without that appreciation, without that focus on your own journey, you'll never be happy no matter what you achieve. The seventh sign of an unhappy life is you're terrified of change, even though you know your current situation isn't working. You know the job is wrong, the relationship is wrong, the city is wrong, the life is wrong. But the thought of changing it, of stepping into uncertainty, of leaving what's familiar, even though it's making you miserable, that terrifies you more than staying does. So you stay, you tolerate. You convince yourself it's not that bad, that everyone struggles, that this is just how it is, and that fear of change, that preference for known misery over unknown possibility, it's the clearest sign that you're living an unhappy life. Because happy people don't fear change. They might be cautious, they might be strategic, but they're not paralyzed by it. They're not choosing to stay in situations they know are wrong just because leaving feels scary. Here's what this looks like. You fantasize about quitting, about leaving, about starting over. You think about it constantly. Imagine how it would feel. Plan what you'd do differently. But you never actually do it. You never take the step. You never make the change. Because when it comes down to it, when you're standing at the edge of actually doing it, the fear takes over. The what-ifs flood in. What if it doesn't work out? What if you can't find something better? What if you regret it? What if you fail? And those what-ifs, those fears, they keep you frozen, keep you stuck in a situation you know is making you unhappy, because at least it's familiar. At least you know what to expect. At least you're not risking the unknown. Epictetus taught that we should focus only on what's within our control, and fear is trying to control what's not within your control, which is the future, the outcome. What will happen if you make the change? You can't control that. You can't know for certain it will work out. But what you can control is whether you stay in a situation you know is wrong or whether you take action toward something that might be right. And choosing to stay because you're afraid of the might be means you're choosing certain unhappiness over possible happiness. You're choosing the prison you know over the freedom you don't. I've watched people stay in wrong situations for decades because they were too afraid to change, stayed in marriages that were dead because divorce felt too hard, too uncertain, too scary, stayed in jobs that drained them because starting over felt too risky, too late, too overwhelming, stayed in cities where they had no real connections because moving felt too complicated, too expensive, too unknown. And year after year, they became more bitter, more resentful, more trapped, not because they couldn't leave, but because they were too afraid to. Marcus Aurelius understood that change is the nature of life. He wrote, "The universe is transformation. Life is opinion. And if your opinion is that change is dangerous, that staying is safer, that familiar misery is better than unknown possibility, then you're going to stay unhappy. Because the universe doesn't care about your fear. It keeps transforming, keeps moving, keeps changing. And you can either move with it, adapt to it, embrace it, or you can resist it, fear it, fight it. And resistance creates suffering. It creates the stuck feeling, the trapped feeling, the sense that life is happening to you instead of through you." Seneca was direct about this. He said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and all those fears about what might happen if you change, they're imagination. They're stories you're telling yourself about a future you can't predict. But the suffering you're experiencing now, the unhappiness of staying in a situation you know is wrong, that's real. That's happening, and you're choosing it. You're choosing real suffering to avoid imagined suffering, and that's insane. So here's the final diagnostic. Is there something in your life you know needs to change, but you're too afraid to change it? A relationship, a job, a location, a pattern, a situation. And if there is, if you're staying in something you know is wrong because you're afraid of what might happen if you leave, then you're living an unhappy life. And the solution is not to eliminate fear, it's to act despite fear. It's to recognize that fear is just your nervous system trying to protect you from uncertainty. But uncertainty is where growth lives. Uncertainty is where possibility lives. And if you're never willing to step into uncertainty, you're never going to find anything better than what you have. You're just going to stay in what you know, even when what you know is slowly destroying you. Here's what ties all 7 signs together. An unhappy life is not dramatic. It's not a crisis. It's not rock bottom. It's the slow accumulation of patterns that distance you from what actually matters, from what actually fulfills you, from what actually makes you feel alive. It's waiting for the future instead of being present. It's exhausting yourself on things that don't matter instead of building what does. It's medicating and distracting instead of confronting. It's resenting instead of choosing. It's going flat instead of staying engaged. It's comparing instead of creating. It's fearing change instead of embracing it. And each of these patterns, each of these signs, they're not permanent. They're just what you've been doing. And what you've been doing can change. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And the same applies to a happy life. Waste no more time arguing what a happy life should look like, what conditions need to be met, what changes need to happen. Just start living one. Start being present now instead of waiting for later. Start building what matters to you instead of exhausting yourself on what doesn't. Start confronting instead of medicating. Start choosing instead of resenting. Start engaging instead of going flat. Start creating instead of comparing. Start changing instead of fearing. Because happiness is not a destination, not a condition, not something that happens when everything aligns. Happiness is a practice. It's the daily choice to engage with what matters, to be present for what is, to build toward what could be. And that practice, that choice, it's available to you right now. Not when conditions improve, not when you're ready, not when circumstances change. Now, today, this moment. The question is, will you take it? Will you stop performing happiness and start actually building it? Will you stop tolerating unhappiness and start confronting what's creating it? Epictetus said the key to happiness is wanting what you have, not having what you want. And if these 7 signs apply to you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, then you're spending all your energy wanting what you don't have while resenting what you do. And that's the formula for permanent unhappiness. But the inverse is also true. When you start appreciating what is while building what could be, when you stop waiting and start living, when you stop avoiding and start confronting, that's when happiness becomes possible. Not as some distant goal, but as a daily experience. Seneca taught that we are always complaining that our days are few and acting as though there would be no end to them. And if you're living an unhappy life, if these 7 signs describe your reality, then you're wasting your days. You're wasting them waiting, exhausting yourself on nothing, medicating, resenting, going flat, comparing and fearing. And those days, they don't come back. You don't get to relive them once you've figured it out. This is it. This is your life. And it's happening now while you're busy being unhappy, while you're busy tolerating, while you're busy waiting for some future moment when things will be different. So stop waiting, stop tolerating, stop performing, and start living. Start confronting what's not working. Start building what matters. Start choosing happiness not as some distant destination, but as a daily practice of presence, of engagement, of alignment. Because you deserve more than an unhappy life that looks good on paper. You deserve to actually feel alive, actually feel engaged, actually feel like your life is yours and you're living it, not just enduring it. Stay focused, stay grounded, and remember, Unhappiness is not your destiny. It's just your pattern, and patterns can be broken. The question is, when will you break them? Because every day you delay is another day living a life you know is wrong. And you don't have unlimited days. You have now. So use it. Change what needs changing. Build what needs building. And stop accepting unhappiness as just how things are. Because it's not. It's just how things have been. And what's been can become different the moment you decide it will.